All right, ladies and gentlemen. So this video is going to be about creating a basic economy system, which is actually very easy, but I'm going to show you all the steps on how to do that. Now, the very first thing that you're going to want to do is create a UI. We're going to be able to work through buttons, and we're going to actually combine the HUD and the UI together. HUD is the heads-up display, UI is the user interface. Don't mix those up. That makes things very miserable because when programming and need things organized, you want what the player can interact with on the UI and what the player just visually sees and is just the HUD. Now, next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to set this to scale with screen size. Now, the reason that we're going to do that is because if we scaled with the pixel size or constant pixel size, um, it's going to mess up your resolution. So I always set it to screen size because the average person has that. Now, the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create buttons. I'm going to assume that you know how to do this, but if you don't, I'm going to show you the first one, and then I'm just going to go ahead and create the system. Um, so, okay, so the very first thing that we're going to want to do, let's go ahead and we'll just move this here. We're going to zoom in. All right, now we're going to make this a little bigger. Now, you'll see I'm actually hitting a lot of hotkeys. It attunes to those Q, W, ERT, and you can see what they kind of do. Play around with those. Those are very important to learn. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make this text a little better because this is not sexy. So, all right, we're going to make it 250. That seems a little bit big. It is. There's a reason why. We're going to do an overflow and a truncate. Now you can see um, that's a little bit much, which is fine. So now we're going to actually adjust the um, size a little bit. There we go. And adjust this down to here. That's our first button, but there's more to it. Now, next is going to be these anchor points. And these are actually very important for UI work. What this does is when you go to play, the button is going to be trapped within these um, four anchors. And that's what I meant when everything gets all screwy. If you go by constant pixel size, if your whole game is by a certain pixel size, fantastic, that's okay. But if it's not, and you don't have everything perfectly measured, go with scale screen size, and that actually takes care of it. I find it a lot easier. And then we're going to go ahead and label it. And we're going to call this the work button. We're going to work for, let's say, $5. Okay. Alrighty, I actually have all the buttons done now, and one thing I did forget to show y'all is that when you're editing the text, you just click on the text button and you just edit down here. So that's how you do that. Okay, so now that we have all these buttons, now what I set up is you got 3 work buttons and you got 3, I guess, purchases. I call it buy. We buy something. But the next thing we're going to want to do is we need a script. All right, so without a script, you can't really do much. What am I doing? Okay, so go ahead and we'll create one. Now we're gonna create, first thing first is a data model. In fact, actually, there's one other thing I forgot to do, but I'm gonna show you because that is important to have. We're creating a text. This is very important. This is how we're gonna see how much money that we have, and we're gonna change this to font 150 money $sign. Say we have up to 8 digits. Now you can't see this up here. Now the reason why I'm typing this in, this actually is not going to be displayed. Um, we're going to use it through script to change it, but this helps us to visualize exactly what's going to be displayed. So you can see how much room it takes. So now we can measure to this. We could have it less than 150. We could do some size shrinking, but I like the size this because it kind of fits fairly well. And last but not least, we want the anchors because the anchors, again, keep things nice and organized for us because we don't want a mess. Messes are not good. Okay, so we have a data model. Let's go ahead and program this in. Now, the data model is going to hold the data values. Now, that sounds very simple. There's no functionality in this. There's going to be 3 different things. You're going to have your scripts, or you're going to have your variables, you're going to have modifiers, and you're going to have accessors. Now, first things first, we're only going to be working with integers. We're not going through decimal places with money or anything like that. So we're going to keep it easy on ourselves. We'll just call it money. How about that? Now we're not going to set a value or anything like that. And we want an accessor so that other scripts can read this value of this variable and see what it is and be able to understand it. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to do a public. Now remember, actually, before you continue, this is technically private. When I don't type it in, it's still private. Public, and we're going to do an integer. We're going to call it money. Now it's going to say you're wrong if you have Visual Studios. They like to say you're wrong before you finish. Very fantastic. Makes you have a good self-esteem. Return money. There we go. We got it right. All right. Now the next thing we're going to do is a modifier. Now modifier allows us to change a value. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make it, oops, we want a public, and we're going to call it, it's a void because it's the type of function that we're creating, and then modify money. Now there's some fancy things that you can do with this. Now inside here is the parameters. You can change the parameter to what you want. So let's put an integer, right? We want an integer because money is an integer and we want to edit that value. So we want an integer inside the parameter. Now putting anything in the parameter is not really going to do anything, but I will show you why, what we're going to do. So we do money plus the, or sorry, plus equals the uh, parameter. Then every time you call this function with an integer inside of the parameters, money is going to add that. And that also means negative. So if you add a negative, it goes down. So when you're buying something. All right. Now, last but not least. Now, normally I would create a whole nother script for this, but because this is such a small project, I am going to add in the UI elements into this script right here. So to do that, we're going to need the UI system. Now that's not going to make a lot of sense right now, but we're going to edit the money text. There's a lot of little things that's going to be happening here, and no, I don't want to do this. Visual Studios. Okay. Now we have this thing called money text. Now we want to be able to define this, right? This is just an empty variable. In fact, both of these are empty variables. Now, as an integer, we haven't done anything. It's going to start out at 0. That works for us because you start out with no money in life. So that's how that works. But text, that's a very important one. Now, here we called this just text. Let's go ahead and give it a new name. There are multiple ways that we can define this. And that's one of the cool things about Unity. I'm just going to define it through script because if you're using something like Collab, a lot of the time the drag and drop method will actually break and it causes lots of problems. And when you got 50, 60 things that you got to re-drag and drop for every person who has access to the project, it becomes a mess and takes up a lot of time. So defining through script is actually the most efficient way to do this. But I will show you how to do this through drag and drop. I'll show you through all of them. So if we create this public, right? Save this, and there we go. Now that we have this on the script, you can see we've defined the variable. It's public, so it's going to show up right here. A lot of people like using public stuff, and you can actually just drag and drop, which is fantastic. But that kind of becomes a mess with Collab. Now, there's another way you can do it, and this way is a little bit more of a serious way of doing it to really define it. Serialize field. It does the same thing. It keeps the variable private, but you can edit it in the inspector. But when you edit it in the inspector, it really gets defined. You can delete everything, or you can make it private again, get rid of serialize, and it's still going to keep the value until you change it. So it's a very serious way of doing it. Now, that's essentially the same thing, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do it our way, which is we're going to define it through script, which is actually fairly easy, but you got to get used to it if you don't know how to do it. So money text equals, right? We're going to define this game object dot find. So we want to find this thing called money text. Now, that's not everything. I just want to double check. I did name it money text. Yes. Now, money text is just a simple game object, right? But well, there's a game object and then there's our actual text. Um, so the game object, this is just an object. But what we want to get is this right here because this is a text component. So we're going to say dot get component. Come on. Component. Then we're going to say text. There we go. Since this is a text variable, we want the text component of the game object that we have labeled as money text. So that's how that works. So let's go ahead and save it and test it. Okay, and there's actually a way that you can see your script or your variables, even though they're private, because they're not going to show up right there. When you're in normal mode, though, if you go to debug, it brings up a lot of info. Don't worry about that. But you got this. You can see this. So we hit the play button, and we don't have maximize on play. Oh, there we go. We've defined it. Now it's always good to double check when you get a big game. Click here, and it'll highlight what your object is right there. So there we go. It's working. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is create a script for button interaction. So that's going to be a very important one. So we're going to create, let's see, button interaction. All right. Now, this isn't really a big deal. We can shove this anywhere, but I'm going to just reshove this back onto HUD/UI because that seems more like a manager at this point. Normally, I would have actual managers to control every aspect of the game rather than just put it on the objects that relate to it because it makes it a lot easier to understand when every major script is in one game object set of parent and child. So, but this is working since this is such a small thing. So what we want to do, reload all. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, we want to clean up our script first of all. Now we want to define things. Now the very first thing that we're going to want to define is this data model. Because what we want to do is we want to create functions for the buttons that accesses the data model and changes the value. So that sounds complicated. It's actually fairly easy. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define data model. And I'm going to call it DM. Because when I define scripts, I keep them as just the abbreviations like that, just to make it so that when I'm accessing something, if it is that way, if it is an abbreviation of just the script, then I know, yeah, it's a script. So what we're going to do is we're going to now define this. The data model DM equals. Now we don't need to say game object defined or anything like that because, for sake of ease, they're on the same object. So normally you could say game object with a lowercase g instead of uppercase g, because uppercase g is to find another game object out there. Lowercase g is to find or to use the game object that the script is on. Now they've actually made it a lot easier. They realize, oh well, that's just taking up so much space. Let's just get rid of it. So now what they've done, which is fantastic, is all you have to say is get component because it's already going to know, hey, it's this game object. It was just kind of some wasted typing space. So get component, and we're going to say data model. And the reason why, again, this works is because this is on the same game object, or the data model is on the same game object as this script. Okay, so now that we've defined it, it's actually fairly easy from here on out. So let's create a button for the working. So we're going to make this a public. We want to make sure it's public so that the button interface and everything can be able to interact because it's a game object that's separate from the game object that the script is on. So we want to make it public so it can be accessed. And we're going to just call it work for $5. Now we're not actually going to be doing anything fancy there. Public work, say 10, and then we have public work. I did not capitalize that, did I? I didn't think so. Bad, Brandon. Okay. So now I have all of our working functions, right? Well, how do we change the value? Why is it still giving me some funky issues? Oh, duh. Gotta avoid it. So how do we access it? Let's go to this. DM dot. Now we've accessed the script data model. Dot allows us to add in some kind of component or function or variable, anything of that sort. That's on that script. Now what do we call it? We called it modify money, right? Oh, look, there it is. Let's say 5. There we go. And I'm just going to do some copy paste. I don't ever recommend doing copy paste, especially if you're early level programming. It can get messy very quickly. And do this. And I am going to change this. Since this is very repetitive, this is where I see copy pasting actually very beneficial. But when you're doing something very unique, you don't want to copy paste. It gets messy very quickly. Now, we're not done yet. These are just functions. They don't do anything. All right. We haven't given them any kind of functionality. But here's how we do it. So we open up here, select, since all these buttons access the same script for button functionality, we're going to add on their on-click function that they've created for us. You hit the plus button. You can add in a bunch of little things, but we're not going to do that. We just need one. Then it looks for a game object, and this is the game object that the script is on. Now we defined it. Now we can actually go through and you can see data model, button interaction. This is the one we want, but we want different stuff for each one of these. So now we have to highlight these individually. Work for $5. Okay, and then we're going to do work for $10. Okay, now I have gone through all these. I'm just going to quickly double check. You got 5, 10, 15, 5, 10, 15. Fantastic. Now, it's one last thing that we haven't done yet. And we want to, whoops. Here we go. We want the data model. Now, right here, it's going to start showing, right? And then it's not going to do it anymore because start just happens at the very beginning of the game. So, what we want to do is we want to avoid update. And there it goes. Hoping that was fixed. Okay. Money text, right? We want the text in Unity to constantly display what we want, what our money is. So money text equals, and it's going to constantly run this, money dot to string. Oh yeah, right. Dot text. I always forget that. So what this little dot text is, so we define this as the text component, right? But it goes further. Out of the text component, what are these things that we're trying to access? Well, we're trying to access the text. So that's where the dot text comes from. Now, if we just did this, it wouldn't look that great. It would just show a numerical value because it's only showing what the integer is. So let's go ahead and get this a little fancier. We're going to say money space, ooh, hit a button, $sign. And now it's going to give us an error because we want to add that. There we go. That's everything. I think we're done. So let's go ahead and hit the play button. There wasn't a lot of save and test it. Okay, there we go. So we'll work one of each, and then we'll buy one of each. There we go. Now, that's one thing that we haven't done. This is depending on if you want to do it or not, and I'm going to show it just in case if your system does not want to go negative. But yeah, you can go in debt pretty heavy. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to do a clamp. Okay, so the way that we're going to be able to do a clamp is we're going to do money equals mathf dot clamp, which is mathf is a bunch of mathematical functions that you can call. Clamp is one to say you can't go below here and you can't go above here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say what we want is the float value. Now we're using an integer, but it can still register that just fine. The minimum we do not want to go below 0, and since we have our digits here at 3 digits, the highest number that we can go to is 999, so we do not want to go above that. Oops. And there we go. That's everything right there. Now that's just clamping. That does not cover the if you don't have enough money, don't do this. But we're going to ignore that for now. So you can see it's clamped. It never goes below. So you have 15. So you can still buy. But that's some basic if statements that you can throw in. It's a little bit of a logic problem. But I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I am more than happy to help out as much as I possibly can. And I hope you all have a good day.